Night descended on Seoul with the density of an omen, and the rain, dripping down the skyscrapers, seemed to herald the beginning of something irreversible. Inside the luxurious penthouse of the Hyun Group, the sound of thunder mingled with that of pent-up breathing, as if even the air feared what was about to happen. Choi Hyun-woo, the young CEO who had conquered the business world through coldness and ambition, watched his wife, Yoon Mi-ra, as if staring at a memory he longed to erase. In his eyes there was a mixture of anger and contempt, and in every word that left his lips, a blow that destroyed what little remained between them. Mi-ra, her face pale and her hands trembling, was trying to understand when love turned to judgment. Everything she said was drowned out by the arrogance of the man who once promised to protect her. Behind him, almost hidden by the darkness, Choi Soo-min, the wealthy and calculating lover, watched with a discreet smile, the smile of someone who knows. They've won a war that should never have happened. Mi-ra's heart was breaking, but Hyun-woo's already seemed petrified. With a sudden gesture, he ripped from her neck the necklace he had given her on their wedding day, a symbol of a love now tainted by pride and deceit. The sound of the metal falling to the floor echoed like a funeral bell. He ordered her to leave without even glancing at his son sleeping a few feet away. The door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was crueler than any scream. But what Hyun-woo never imagined was that very night fate began to prepare the price for his sin. When love is destroyed by one's own hands, is it possible to escape the consequences the heart insists on exacting? If this scene has already made you feel something, subscribe now and leave your like, because what comes next will touch you deep in your soul. The days following that night became a blur of cold memories, and the city of Seoul seemed to keep spinning as if nothing had happened. The corporate world celebrated Choi Hyun-woo like a prodigy, a ruthless businessman who turned everything he touched into gold. Cameras followed him, journalists idolized him, and the flashbulbs reflected off his blank gaze, revealing a gleam that was no longer ambition, but absence. Beneath the impeccable suit and calculated smile lay a heavy silence, the same silence that echoed from the moment the door closed behind him. Yoon Mi-ra. While he was talking about success and expansion, another reality was taking shape far away, in the simple alleys of Incheon. Mi-ra now lived with her son Min Seo, in a small rented room with peeling walls and a musty smell. Each morning began with the same routine, preparing some rice, straightening the boy's patched uniform and smiling even though his heart was still in pieces. Life's invisible camera showed the contrast between two worlds. On one side, the shine of mirrored buildings. On the other, the steam of a hot soup made with what little was left in the pot. Mi-ra was the kind of woman who, even in adversity, still found kindness. She helped neighbors, picked wilted flowers from the ground, and held a faith in her eyes that not even pain could erase. Hyun-woo, on the other hand, became increasingly cold. His routine was marked by endless meetings, expensive dinners, and hugs that meant nothing. Choi Soo-min, ever present, fed his ego with false smiles and promises of even greater power. With each new contract, he believed he was winning, when in reality he was slowly drifting away from everything that once made him human. At night, alone in the silent apartment, Hyun-woo sometimes thought he heard the sound of light footsteps in the hallway, an echo of memories perhaps. His son's laughter, Mi-ra's subtle perfume, the memory of a home he himself had destroyed. But he was soon distracted by Soo-min's sweet, poisonous voice on the phone, calling him to another event, another toast, another illusion. Across the city, Mi-ra watched the distant lights of the skyscrapers, wondering if he ever thought of her. The boy, asleep beside her, dreamed of his father, and she simply caressed him silently, as if trying to shield a child's heart from the weight of the world. Life went on, but the invisible threads of fate were already beginning to intertwine again. And without realizing it, Hyun-woo walked straight to the beginning of his downfall, a ruin that would not come from competition, nor from the crisis, but from something much deeper, from a lie that would soon take shape and destroy everything he believed he controlled. Because true punishment never comes suddenly. It begins with a whisper and grows the moment pride turns to blindness. The success of Choi Hyun-woo seemed complete, but the higher he climbed, the more the rarefied air of power stripped him of any trace of humanity. Inside the meeting rooms of Hyun Group, conversations stopped being about innovation and became about influence, alliances, and control. It was in this landscape of greed and hubris that a silent seed began to be planted, and its name was Choi Soo-min. The only daughter of a billionaire conglomerate, Soo-min had a gift for transforming interest into affection and ambition into seduction. She knew exactly how to speak, when to touch, and above all, how to manipulate. She understood Hyun-woo's insecurities, his fear of losing the market's respect, and the weight of family expectations. She whispered in his ear phrases that sounded like advice, but were orders masked by sweetness. "You're too brilliant to be stuck in the past," she said, sliding her fingers down his arm as a faint hint of irony crept into her smile. Hyun-woo's mother, a strict and traditional woman, made no secret of her contempt for Mi-ra from the beginning. "Sons from simple families will never know how to sustain the name of an empire," she repeated, feeding her son's pride like someone feeding a poison disguised as honor. And between the fear of disappointing his mother and his fascination with his mistress, Hyun-woo began to see Mi-ra no longer as a wife, but as a silent obstacle preventing him from becoming the man he believed he deserved to be. That's when the rumors began. A leak of confidential information had hit the company, and Soo-min, with the coolness of someone who had already prepared the groundwork, insinuated that the person responsible was closer than he imagined. Mi-ra has always been too naive. Hyun-woo, sometimes naivety is mistaken for betrayal. These words, spoken in a light and calculated tone, fell like poison on his mind, slowly eroding the last shred of trust he had left. Mi-ra, for her part, noticed the distance, but didn't understand why. She tried to get closer, bring food, talk about her son, but was met with icy stares and curt answers. The man who once held her hands tenderly now avoided them as if they were burning. Deep down, she felt something was changing, but she believed that love could still heal. Little did she know that love, at that point, had already been condemned to oblivion. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo sank deeper and deeper into the illusion of control. Surrounded by advisors and sycophants, he began to confuse obedience with respect and silence with loyalty. Deep within, doubt lingered, but pride shouted louder. He chose to believe his lover because it was easier to blame Mi-ra than to face his own guilt. And that was how the mistake began. Not with a sudden decision, but with small concessions to vanity and fear. He didn't know it yet, but he had just opened the door to his own hell, and every step he took from there would take him deeper. Because fate doesn't punish with violence, but with irony. And the first punishment for a man blinded by pride is to believe the lies he wants to hear. The day when Yoon Mi-ra was thrown out of the house where she once believed her happiness began like any other. The coffee was still steaming on the table, and the little Min Seo she played with the same toy car Hyun-woo had given her for her last birthday. But that day, the routine carried a different silence, a heavy silence that seemed to foreshadow the end. When the lawyers arrived, carrying divorce papers and packed bags, Mi-ra understood without needing explanation that love had become a torn contract. The scene unfolded before the employees, all motionless, involuntary witnesses to the injustice. Hyun-woo, standing with a distant look in his neat suit, avoided looking at her, as if the mere sight of her reminded him of a part of himself he wanted to erase. Mira, her hands trembling, held the broken necklace he had thrown to the ground days before. The sound of the rain outside mingled with the sound of her footsteps dragging her suitcase to the door, while her son cried, unable to understand why his father wouldn't hug him. It was in that moment that she realized that the cruelest loneliness isn't that of the alone, but of the unseen, still loving. The streets of Incheon, they welcomed her without mercy. Mira sought shelter in a cheap boarding house, where the musty smell mingled with the hope of starting over. She spent sleepless nights watching her son sleep, wondering at what point love had turned into punishment. Sometimes she thought of returning, asking for forgiveness, even though she was completely innocent. But the memory of his cold, merciless gaze prevented her from doing so. His pride had become her prison. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The money ran out, her name forgotten, and the world that once applauded her now pretended not to see her. Mira began selling small personal items, then her clothes, until only souvenirs remained. Still, he refused to give up. She washed clothes for neighbors, cleaned small shops, did whatever it took to ensure a bowl of rice for her son. And each night as she tucked him into bed, he whispered, "One day, all this will pass." Yet the pain didn't go away. It merely learned to change form. It became quieter, denser, more mature. Instead of tears came restrained smiles. Instead of anger, resignation. Life, cruel in its irony, seemed to test her at every turn, but it also shaped something new within her, a strength born from suffering itself. About that, Choi Hyun-woo followed his golden routine, without imagining that destiny was already writing his revenge in silence. Every laugh next to Soo-min, every glass of champagne raised at luxurious dinners would be charged with interest he couldn't yet comprehend. Because life doesn't forget those it saw, humiliate the innocent. It just waits for the right moment to bring them back to earth. And it was precisely at that point, between despair and hope, that something began to shift within Mira. She didn't know it yet, but the emptiness surrounding her was about to transform into strength. There was something in the way she looked at her son, in the serenity beginning to blossom in her. Weary gaze that signaled the beginning of a new phase, because sometimes everything must die, love, pride, and even faith itself, so that something greater can rise from the ashes. And fate, impatient, was already preparing the first sign that her true return was much closer than anyone could have imagined. Time passed, but Choi Hyun-woo thought of Yun-mira as. The months turned into years. Her absence became just a distant memory, something he thought he'd buried with the past. To him, Mira had vanished, perhaps fled the country, perhaps married another man, perhaps simply given up on life. The truth, however, was that she was still alive, even though the world already considered her dead. In a forgotten neighborhood on the outskirts of Incheon, Mira lived a routine that wasn't measured in days, but in survival. Working at a community landfill, he sorted recyclables with bruised hands, a tired body, and a mind struggling to stay afloat. Beside him, his little Minacio, he grew up. Too fast, learning early the meaning of hunger, cold, and dignity. He never asked about his father, but the look he cast toward the horizon said what words dared not express. Longing had become a legacy. Mira was no longer the fragile woman Hyun-woo had abandoned. Pain had shaped her, sculpted within her a quiet strength that no power could destroy. Even surrounded by misery, she maintained the same habit of fixing her hair before going out, of carefully folding her son's clothes, of giving thanks for every meal, no matter how small. It was as if within her lay an ancient faith, the same one that suffering could not corrupt. Sometimes at night, she would sit on the edge of her makeshift bed and gaze at the sky through the broken window. Some days she cried, others she just smiled silently. She had learned that suffering has its own language, one that teaches, purifies, and prepares. And without realizing it, every tear shed in that darkness was being held by fate itself, which, sooner or later, would exact its price on the man who had left her there. Meanwhile, Hyunwoo was at the height of his success. His relationship with Choi Soo-min seemed consolidated, and her family's empire was now fused with his name. Newspapers called him the genius of the new Korean economy, and magazines plastered his face as an example of his rise. But there was something no photograph revealed: emptiness. Sometimes, between toasts, he would notice a faint sound echoing in his mind, like the distant laughter of a child. It was the kind of memory he tried to silence with glasses of wine and luxurious nights, unaware that guilt, when silenced, only grows. Mira, on the other hand, was beginning to change. Her gaze, once filled with sadness, now reflected serenity. The calloused hands that collected the trash also held small pieces of hope. She began helping other women at the dump, sharing what little she had, transforming her suffering into compassion. The woman who had once been humiliated was now learning to live again, and her absence from Hyunwoo's world wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of a new version of herself. And while he believed he had erased the past, fate just watched silently, waiting for the right moment to return to him everything he had caused. Because true rebirth doesn't happen when one escapes hell, but when one learns to walk within it without losing one's soul. And Mira was about to discover that fate, when it decides to act, doesn't send warnings, only signs. Fate, silent and patient, began to move just when Choi Hyunwoo, I believed I had won. Everything seemed too perfect. The company growing at a dizzying pace, the international business expanding, the partnership with my family, Choi Soo-min strengthening his power and status. It was the pinnacle of his career, the mountaintop where he believed nothing could touch him. But the winds change when the heart ignores the price of ambition. The first blow came disguised as coincidence. A billion-dollar contract with an American multinational was cancelled without explanation. Soon after, an anonymous investigation was opened, exposing internal documents and financial misappropriations that Hyunwoo had never authorized, but which bore his forged signature. The media feasted on the scandal, and the name Hyun Group became synonymous with corruption and decadence. In the following weeks, the press surrounded the company's headquarters. Reporters waited for him at the exit, shouting questions that made him lose control. Is it true you used shareholders' money? Are you still in touch with the Choi family? The calm that had once made him admired now turned into suppressed despair. Inside the office, alone before the glass walls that once reflected power, he saw only his own reflection, tired, pale, and unrecognizable. But fate isn't content with financial losses. It likes to hit where it hurts most. Then came the second, crueler blow. Soo-min, the lover who had once made him believe in paradise, was now pushing him toward hell. During a press conference, she accused him of manipulating tax records and using her influence to illicitly enrich himself. In minutes, the man she claimed to love was transformed into a public villain, and the smile with which she destroyed him was the same one she had used to win him over. Doors began to close. Associates abandoned him. Friends pretended not to recognize him, and even his mother, once haughty and arrogant, retreated into silence, ashamed of being remembered as the woman who created a monster. Hyunwoo tried to regain control, calling contacts, negotiating deals, but discovered that power is like glass. It shines until the moment it shatters. Then it shatters everything that tries to hold it back. Amidst this chaos, something began to change within him. The nights became too long, and the sound of rain, which he had previously ignored, began to haunt him like a reminder. He woke with nightmares, saw shadows. In the hallways, heard a child's laughter echoing in his dreams. It was Min Seo, the son he never looked for again, the son whose image he tried to erase, but who now emerged with more force than ever. The guilt began to whisper. In the following days, Yunwoo wandered the streets of Seoul in search of peace. He stopped in front of storefronts, saw families laughing, mothers hugging their children, and felt something tighten in his chest with a pain that didn't originate in his body. Sometimes. He picked up his phone and typed Mira's name, but stopped before sending a message. Pride, fear, or perhaps a premonition. Something told him she no longer needed him, and that destroyed him even more. The irony of life is that, while he was trying to erase the past was preparing to resurface. And soon, no contract, fortune, or arrogance would be able to save him from what was to come. Because karma doesn't arrive screaming. It comes slowly, disguised as coincidence, until the day the guilty party looks it in the eye and recognizes the face of the one they once humiliated. The years had passed like a dense fog, and Choi Hyunwoo, once a symbol of power, had become a shadow of its former self. The man who used to command crowded rooms could now barely hold his own gaze in the mirror. His unkempt beard, wrinkled suit, and weary gaze betrayed someone who had lost everything: fortune, prestige, and above all, peace. The city that once applauded him now ignored him, and the friends who had flattered him vanished like smoke. On that grey morning, Hyunwoo walked aimlessly through the narrow streets of Incheon, driven more by guilt than desire. His pockets were empty, and his mind filled with memories. Around every corner, the wind carried fragments of the past. The sound of laughter, the faint perfume he thought forgotten, the distant echo of a voice calling his name. Life, cruel and precise, seemed to guide him to the exact place where destiny finally awaited him. That's when he saw her. In the middle of the street, among piles of trash and makeshift shacks, a woman knelt, sorting through cans and bottles with dust-covered hands. The afternoon sun, shy between the clouds, reflected on her face in an almost divine way. It was Yoon Mira. Time had passed, but there was something unchanging about her: serenity. The same gaze that had once begged for love now shone with a peace he couldn't understand. Beside her, a young man, thin and determined, was nimbly collecting the recyclables. Hyunwoo watched him for a few seconds before realizing the truth. This was Choi Min Seo, his son. The same boy he ignored, now grown and shaped by his mother's strength. Hyunwoo's body froze. His legs weakened, his heart raced, and for a moment everything around him went silent. It was as if the world had stopped just so he could stare at his own past, transformed into a mirror. Mira looked up and saw him. No words were spoken, no gesture of anger, nor surprise. Just that gaze, steady, distant and serene, as if someone had already forgiven but not forgotten. Choi Soo-min, who was with him, noticed the tension and let out a mocking laugh. "Is this where your ex-wife works? What a pathetic end, Hyunwoo. Look at her, still picking up trash." The words echoed like blades. He wanted to respond, wanted to defend Mira, but his voice failed him. His silence was his confession. As Soo-min laughed, Mira bent down again, calmly continuing her work. That simple, devastating scene shattered what remained of his pride. Hyunwoo took a step forward, but didn't have the courage to approach. Something inside him told him it was too late, that this moment wasn't his. It was like watching a flower grow among ruins, beautiful but untouchable. Min Seo's gaze, upon noticing the man standing still, was cold, protective, filled with something Hyunwoo recognized immediately: contempt. And in that instant, He understood that losing his wife's love had been painful, but losing his son's respect was punishment. Soo-min's car sped off and disappeared around the corner, taking with it the last vestige of the life he once thought he controlled. Hyunwoo stood motionless, watching Mira collect trash under the setting sun. No luxury, no fortune, nothing had ever felt as pure as that moment when she ignored him with dignity. And when he finally closed his eyes, a single certainty took over his mind. Everything he had despised was now watching him from above. And he, for the first time, felt small in the face of the greatness of those who had learned to survive without him. But fate wasn't done yet, because the reunion was only the first step. The real reckoning was yet to come, and this time Hyunwoo would have nowhere to hide. The next day, unable to sleep and overcome by a weight that prevented him from breathing, Choi Hyun-woo turned to that poor neighborhood. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe forgiveness, maybe redemption, maybe just the chance to look into the eyes of Yoon Mira and believe that the past could still be fixed. The light rain that fell on Incheon seemed to guide him back to the narrow streets, and with each step, the sound of the water echoed like the beating of a troubled heart. When he saw her again, her back was turned, stacking recyclable bags next to a small cart. Her frail body and tired hands betrayed the hard life she'd led, but there was a quiet strength about her, a kind of beauty that didn't come from appearance, but from the dignity that suffering couldn't erase. Hyunwoo stopped a few meters away, unsure of what to say. His voice caught in his throat, choked between regret and shame. Mira sensed his presence before she even saw him. She turned slowly and their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. She showed neither surprise nor anger. She simply looked at him, a calm, deep look that said everything words could never express. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. He tried to move closer, but his body hesitated. "Mira," he murmured, his tone barely audible. She simply took a deep breath and replied calmly, "You still don't understand, do you? It's not about what you lost. It's about what you chose to destroy." Those words pierced the silence like thunder. Hyunwoo wanted to explain, wanted to say he regretted it, that he didn't know how much he had hurt her, but her gaze stopped him. There was no more room for justification. The love that had once existed was now a memory, and the forgiveness he sought wasn't a right, but a grace he might never receive. It was then that Min-seo appeared, coming from one of the alleys, carrying a small bag of cans. Upon seeing his father, the young man stopped, motionless. The look he gave Hyunwoo wasn't one of hatred, but of distance. The look of someone who'd learned to live without expecting anything. He approached his mother and stood in front of her, as if instinctively wanting to protect her. Hyunwoo tried to smile, to take a step toward him, but the boy looked away and continued what he was doing. Mira placed her hand on her son's shoulder and said softly, "Don't look back, my love. Those who live in the past end up forgetting the present." That sentence was the final sentence. Hyunwoo understood there was no going back. The world he'd destroyed could not be rebuilt, and the most painful part wasn't being rejected, but realizing she no longer needed to hate him. She was simply over him. Mira returned to work, serene, and Hyunwoo stood there watching her until the sun set. When he finally walked away, his heart was so heavy that each step felt like a punishment. He understood that love, when mistreated, doesn't die all at once. It dies slowly until the silence becomes more eloquent than any goodbye. But fate, never content with merely teaching, still had one last lesson in store. And what would come next wouldn't just be regret. It would be the visible, cruel, and inevitable punishment of a man who would finally learn the true price of his choices. The days that followed their reunion were the longest of his life. Choi Hyun-woo, the image of Yoon Mi-rak kneeling among piles of trash with her son by her side, had become an open wound he couldn't heal. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her serene face, her steady gaze, the silence that spoke louder than any insult. And the more he tried to escape, the deeper fate pushed him into the abyss he had dug for. Himself, his health began to fail. The nights became labyrinths of insomnia and remorse. Sometimes he would wake with a start, calling out for Mira as if trying to rescue a ghost. The apartment, now empty, felt like a mausoleum of memories. The expensive furniture, the paintings, the imported wines, everything had lost its meaning. He wandered the rooms like a stranger in his own life, and the silence, once a symbol of power, was now merely the echo of his own solitude. Penniless, abandoned by everyone, Hyunwoo tried to sell what remained, but even the assets he thought untouchable were frozen by lawsuits and debts. The press hounded him like vultures on carrion. The man who had once graced magazine covers was now singled out on the streets, the target of laughter and scorn. No one saw the brilliant CEO anymore, only the man who had destroyed everything through arrogance. It was then that his body began to betray his mind. Sudden fainting spells, dizziness, memory lapses. The doctors said it was stress, but Hyunwoo knew it was guilt. The illness didn't come from the body, but from the soul. He began wandering the streets aimlessly, talking to himself, chatting with people who were no longer there. One night, a security guard found him sitting under a bridge, his shoes muddy and his eyes staring blankly into space. He claimed to have heard a voice calling his name, sweet and distant, like Mira's. Meanwhile, Mira continued her simple life, unaware that fate had already brought her to her knees. Her son grew up studied, and she, even amid poverty, kept her heart at peace. Sometimes, looking up at the sky, she wondered if Hyunwoo still existed, but quickly dismissed the thought. The past, for her, was gone. One afternoon, however, on her way back from the market, she saw him. Hyunwoo, dirty and hunched over, sitting on the sidewalk, holding a crumpled newspaper with his own picture on the cover. The headline read, "Former CEO of Hyun Group seen wandering the streets." Mira stopped, watching him from afar. Time seemed suspended, the entire world mute. She felt neither anger nor pleasure. She felt only compassion and a strange sadness at realizing that the man she had once loved had been swallowed up by his own choices. Hyunwoo looked up, and for a moment their eyes met again. He smiled shakily, as if recognizing a miracle. But before he could say anything, Mira looked away and continued on her way, as serene as ever. He remained there, kneeling, watching her walk away until she disappeared into the streets. And when the wind blew, Hyunwoo finally understood that he had lost everything, not because of divine punishment, but because the love he had rejected was the same one that now left him alone at the end of the road. But fate, even after punishing, still has one last gesture of mercy in store, and soon Mira would be called to prove that forgiving isn't always forgetting. Sometimes it's freeing oneself forever. That night, the east wind that passed through the alleys of Incheon seemed different. It carried an ancient melancholy, the kind of silence that precedes a revelation. Mira lying beside her sleeping son, she felt something stir inside her, a gentle restlessness, as if her heart were calling out to something she thought she had left behind. She slowly got up, covered the boy with a worn blanket, and looked out the window. The moon, high and pale, illuminated the horizon with a cold light, and it was at that moment that she decided to leave. She didn't know why, she just knew she had to. The streets were nearly deserted. Mira walked slowly, the sound of her own footsteps mingling with the distant murmur of the wind, until, as she turned a corner, she saw him again, Choi Hyun-woo, sitting under the awning of a closed store, trembled, hugging his body as if trying to hold on to what little dignity he had left. His face, covered in dirt and fatigue, barely resembled the man who once ruled the business world. In his eyes, only emptiness remained. Mira stopped, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. There was no more anger, no more resentment. Time, relentless, had already ripped away everything that could hurt her. She approached slowly, took a small package from her bag, and placed it beside him. It was a simple snack, a blanket, and a bottle of water. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Hyunwoo, surprised, looked at her with teary eyes and tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The only word he managed to whisper was a weak, trembling, "I'm sorry." Mira just watched him, silent. That man, who had once made her cry, now cried for himself. And in that contrast, she understood something no pain had taught her. Forgiveness is not a favor granted to another, but a liberation offered to oneself. She knelt beside him, touched his shoulder, and said in a calm voice, "I forgave you a long time ago, Hyunwoo. I just didn't know you'd need to hear it one day." He closed his eyes, and a single tear slid down his face. Mira stood, tucked the blanket over him and walked away, leaving him there, covered by the night and the last kindness she had left to offer. He walked without looking back, feeling the weight of years melt away from his shoulders. For the first time he felt light, and as the rain began to fall again, Choi Hyunwoo, he remained motionless, feeling the heat of that gesture penetrate deeper than any pain. It wasn't the end he'd imagined, but perhaps it was the only one he truly deserved. And so, the all-seeing fate prepared the final act, the poetic conclusion to a story that spoke not only of guilt and punishment, but of the quiet power of redemption and the faith that survives even when love dies. The sun rose timidly over Incheon, spreading shades of gold and grey over a still sleeping city. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, and between silent alleys, Yunmirashi walked slowly, feeling that each step took her a little further away from the pain. There was something different in the air, an almost imperceptible lightness, as if the universe had finally granted her a moment of peace after so many years of turmoil. The memories came and went, but they no longer hurt. They had become part of her history, not wounds, but scars that now shone in the dawn light. At that very moment, not far away, Choi Hyun-woo, he woke up. His head felt heavy, his body ached, but there was something new in his gaze, a stillness. For the first time in a long time, he felt no anger, no desperate regret. He simply understood. He remembered Mira's words, the light touch on his shoulder, the silent forgiveness she offered him. That gesture had become his last anchor. The pride that had once sustained him now dissolved like smoke. Standing, Hyunwoo watched the sunrise between the ancient buildings and smiled, a brief, genuine smile. Not the smile of someone who has won, but of someone who has finally understood that love is not a bargaining chip. It is a gift that is lost when one tries to possess it. Regret no longer tormented him. It had transformed into gratitude. He knew he would never get back what he had destroyed, but he also knew that Mira, in her greatness, had freed him from the invisible prison of remorse. Meanwhile, Mira returned home. Her son, now almost a man, was waiting for her at the door with a calm smile. She embraced him tenderly, feeling in the warmth of that gesture the meaning of everything she had experienced. The love she had lost in the past had been reborn in the present, multiplied in the form of affection and hope. Fate, sometimes cruel, is also fair. It allows mistakes to become lessons and suffering to teach the value of light. Mira looked up to the sky and silently gave thanks. She understood that life had taken nothing from her. It had only given back what was truly hers: peace. And as the sun rose, illuminating the wet streets, the narrator's voice seemed to whisper one last truth. A man can conquer the world and still lose his soul, But a woman who learns to forgive discovers that nothing can destroy her, because the love that survives pain is the only one that time cannot erase. The rain slowly stopped, and a sacred silence filled the streets of Incheon, as if even the wind had decided to stop to respect the end of a story. Between the discreet shine of the puddles and the reflection of the sun in the ancient windows, destiny seemed to whisper that everything had come to pass. Yoon. Mirashi stood at her front door, gazing at the horizon with a serene gaze, the kind that holds within itself more answers than questions. Around her, the world remained the same streets, the same sky, but inside her, everything was new. She took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in years, the air light. Without pain, without sorrow, without the past. Every tear, every scar, every night she thought she couldn't bear had been transformed into something greater, into wisdom. It was as if life, after tearing everything from her, had finally crowned her with the rarest gift, the gift of not holding a grudge. The forgiveness it offered, Choi Hyun-woo, wasn't out of weakness, but out of self-love. It was the quietest way of telling the universe that she had won. Across the city, Hyun-woo walked slowly across the bridge he once crossed every day to work. The wind blew cold, but for once he didn't flinch. He looked up at the sky and thought of Mira, not with guilt, but with gratitude. Her image would stay with him forever, not as a burden, but as a reminder that power and pride can never sustain what love builds. He had lost everything, yes, but perhaps in that moment, he had found the most important thing, the regret that liberates. As the imaginary camera pulled away, capturing the two characters in opposite directions, she heading home, he disappearing into the city lights, a soft voiceover concluded the cycle. In the end, fate doesn't punish, it teaches. And every pain, every fall, is just the path that leads us back to what we should never have forgotten. The love that heals, the forgiveness that frees, and the faith that begins anew. The sun, now full, bathed everything in a golden light. And before the slowly darkening screen, the final voice emerges with emotion and depth. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Here, each narrative offers a new perspective on love, regret, and destiny. Like, share, and activate the bell, because every week new stories arrive to move, inspire, and transform you.